You'll know when you have a wild woman. She'll practice her craft without boundaries. She is truly autonomous. Her loyalty is only to the family she serves. She will not allow herself to be held back by a system she didn't create.
This podcast is for the birth keepers who want to grow and change, who are open to learning through self-reflection and supportive community. We are creating a space to explore without judgment. We are remembering we were born wild.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Born Wild podcast. I'm your host, Sophia Henderson. And today I have with me our student, Krissa. Would you like to say hi to everyone?
Hi, everybody. So nice to be with you today.
And we have a guest today, Rachel, who's going to introduce herself and share all her wisdom today.
Hi, my name is Rachel. Thank you so much, Sophia and Carissa, for having me on today. I'm super excited to be here. I'm a midwife here in Maine, and I also am the creatrix of Elemental Birth Rites, which is my online learning membership and community where we focus on pregnancy and birth as a rites of passage. And I'm super excited to have a conversation with you ladies today.
I'm curious, can you guys speak on how you met? Because Carissa, you were the one who recommended that I interview Rachel. And I'm laughing because I said, good morning, and you're in Maine. It's not.
Feels like the eternal morning. I'm happy to just keep waking up.
So how did you two meet?
Carissa?
Well, actually, how I met Rachel is through having a loss. And so I was connected to Rachel to connect with her about like moving through that process of what it's like to meaning like a loss of a baby as a birth worker. And so was looking for some spiritual guidance in that and holding. And I was connected to Rachel in that process. And it was such a gift to ground in with her about that journey. So that's more of the truth of like how we came together was through a spirit baby actually connecting us together. And I feel like often I'm a student midwife right now, so people know in a midwifery school, a lot of your homework is online and in modules, and you just really need like a human being to connect with when you journey through that for the first times. Rachel was there for me, and like I have my midwives also, but sometimes you just need other people to guide you through that. So that was really supportive, and she offers more support for all people in that. So I thought she would be great to just have on the podcast to kind of talk about what does it mean when birth is a rite of passage in that way.
Yeah. Such a sensitive topic, loss. Yeah. Well, let's back up a little bit more, and will you take us on your journey? Like, how are you even here as a midwife, teaching what you teach? Where did that
Thank you
start?
so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. And that feels like a really beautiful, just like pathway, golden pathway into talking about my journey and how I come to do this work, because death is such a ally for me in my work and in my journey with midwifery. Because when I began my journey becoming a student midwife, my husband now, who I met 13 years ago, and I got pregnant within 6 months of meeting and had our first miscarriage together, which was actually such a rites of passage for me into coming into this work that I now offer, because that baby who came to grace my womb and awaken my body had so much medicine for me in terms of becoming a midwife, in terms of initiation. And when I was going through that experience of loss, I was actually midwifing myself through that particular experience, which ended up being in a public space, just based on, the circumstances of life at that time. And I had a very public grieving moment on the floor of Boston Bruins like lobby hockey ring, which I'm not even like a sports person, so it's just such an obscure place to be having this experience. And then was able to get back to a hotel room with my now parents-in-law the first time I was meeting them, where they actually guided us through the rest of the actual like loss of the tissues. And it was such a bonding experience, but it was also so powerful to go through the grieving process after that by myself to a certain degree, but also because miscarriage is not often something that people get a lot of guidance through, because generally they haven't started midwifery care at that time, and or if they do, they stop calling the midwife and they kind of disappear into oblivion. And it was such an awakening for me to go through that process alone and see the giant gap that was missing. Women going through that process, how common it is and how often like taboo and unspoken it is. And that baby, that spirit that came through me was such an awakener for me and my journey, because I felt like what I really saw was no matter how pregnancy ends, whether it be in the birth of a live child or of a spirit baby that, is then on another dimension. That awakening that happens is such an initiation, and it deserves to be treated that way. And I don't feel like within the current maternal support system that I've seen that there's a lot of attention given to the spiritual journey of becoming pregnant and what happens when a spirit inhabits our wombs, and whether they pass early or they come to be a live child. I felt like I had a certain avenue and glimpse into something that I saw that I needed to add to my midwifery care, especially having walked through as a student, probably a similar position that Carissa was at that time, almost finishing my numbers and having a lot of experience doing a lot of support for the midwives I was working with, and seeing all these women going through this pregnancy portal, and whether they had like this beautiful birth at home that was like very picturesque or they ended up in the hospital. I saw that they were interfacing with an aspect of their very deep karmic work, whether regardless, and that there wasn't often a lot of preparation given to that emotional spiritual journey and what comes of it when walking through that portal. And I felt like this is what this baby has come to show me that I need to bring. And so that's really been the journey of Elemental Birth Rites and how I've come to be standing here now.
So can you walk us through a little bit of that process, like how you do prepare parents emotionally, spiritually, for just like the mystery of birth?
Absolutely. And so the mystery is definitely one of the most guiding principles of the journey that I bring women through, and actually couples too. I really love working with couples, but it's mostly a lot of ancestral healing. So really focusing on where we each came from, a mother and a father, and the great mystery itself. So I created a medicine wheel that walks through facing the mother wound, facing the father wound, and beyond just the wounding that happened there, also the gifts that have come from like being raised by the particular constellation that we each come from, and then contacting the inner child, which I feel like is the heart. And it really is the spirit of sort of our oversoul that guides us through our life, and like reconnecting in with that spirit of ourselves. And at the same time, having this inner child that is growing during pregnancy. It's such an intense and powerful portal to connect with self through the inner child, and sort of have this mirror reflection of there's a consciousness blooming within me, and I am awakening to my own self-care and self-parenting. And then I walk through the elements. So the elements are likened to 5 childhood wounding patterns. So we walk through the air, which is there's a book called The 5 Personality Patterns by Stephen Kessler. And many people have sort of interpreted this work, but these wounding patterns come to manifest in childhood development through different stages of development, and they play out in our psyche to different varying degrees. So we walk through the air, the water, the earth, the fire, and then the ether. And each of those elements within elemental birth rites and elemental midwifery are likened to the stage of development in utero, which is the air. They call it the leaving pattern in the psychospiritual healing modality. It generally comes on board when you're in the womb, and it has to do with how the mother relates to her body, whether she feels safe. And then we move into the water. The water realm is connected to breastfeeding and the period of time when you're receiving the nutrients through the breast. And that is called I feel like I'm like moving so fast, the emerging pattern. So these are the patterns. And then we move into the earth, and the earth is the pattern of the masochist. And it has to do with like when we're trying to differentiate from our parents and create our own will at that time. So like discipline and all of that plays out with the humiliation wound generally, or an invasion wound. And then as we get older in the psychology, we move into the fire, which is the aggressive pattern, which has a lot to do with betrayal and how we've experienced those wounds in our life. And that's usually like a much more intellectually advanced, whereas like we're talking about an airbender, early development, those are like pre-verbal. And so generally with the water pattern as well, very pre-verbal. And then once we get to the aggressive, it's like a very intellectually intelligent wound. We're talking about fire, betrayals with like, when we're little, things that happen, we see things with our parents or what it could even be with friends. And then we move to the ether pattern, which is the rigid pattern. And that pattern is like puberty. So this is like a wound that we pretty much all live in. Like we have shame around our sexuality in our culture. And that is also very like a surfacey because everybody in our culture has some degree of that wound. So it's like sort of seeing where do we spend time in our psyche and these wounding patterns, and how do they play out in our current psyche? How did they come from our mother and father? How are they impacting us? And how do we want to carry forth those wounds into the parenting that we're about to provide? And how do we want to maybe learn to like work with ourselves in new ways so that we have new resources and tools? So we don't necessarily have to just be unconsciously passing on these ancestral patterns.
Can you give an example, if you can think of one, of maybe somebody you worked with, or totally make it up, of like what that would look like working through each one of those and some examples?
Yes. Okay, I'm going to use myself because it's
Okay.
just so much
You're like, that's easier.
So I am a very firebender wound, very aggressive pattern. I grew up with betrayal as like and non-trust as like a really big piece. And so how that played out in my psyche as an adult is that I have trouble trusting people, trouble trusting in general. Right. So how that would play out in a pregnancy might be that I would be like not able to trust that my baby would live, which is interesting because that's exactly what played out, especially my second miscarriage. So another way that that can play out is that it can be very hard for me to accept help because I don't trust people. So a midwife or somebody trying to come in and care for me would be like, okay, I'll let them into a certain degree, but I'm going to take care of this mostly myself. And I'm probably going to keep a lot of this more vulnerable stuff to myself. So that would be like an example of a wounding pattern. And a way that I might work through that would be to work on like affirmations that have to do with trust, and also allowing my system to drop out of the mental and into my body and allowing myself to feel safe, which is a very airbender thing. So they overlap in different ways. And, you know, those wounds come on when we're little. And so it's hard to know exactly, like maybe the exact moment, we might not remember it. But then we have all these opportunities within our mundane life, and very powerfully in pregnancy, if we choose that moment to start to create new patterns by the way that we relate to like those inner atmospheres.
Yeah. And when you're working with your families, like midwifery families, is this like kind of part of what you do, or is this like a whole separate thing? I'm trying to wrap my mind around fitting all the other things in and like trying to help somebody through this. Or are you like, this is like a separate visit that we do where we're working through?
Yep. So I created this course and I actually have the women do the coursework on their own in the
Mm.
background. So like while we're doing prenatal
Yeah.
care, like they're doing that in their free time. And then we can unpack it
Yeah.
during visits. And, you know, I do longer visits. I also have a very low volume practice, which is super important to me and my values because I'm all about going all the way deep. You know, like that's definitely my calling to midwifery, you know, and I can teach people about informed choice and stuff like that, but I don't feel like it takes as much time as I am giving to these visits. And I actually have like a little bit more bandwidth to go into this stuff with people, especially if they've done their homework and like unpacked it and done their journaling and kind of worked through the stuff that I suggest in the coursework while we're going through the prenatal care schedule.
So has your experience with like your losses, and then like I've lost track of time, like when did you become a midwife? Were you already, or that hadn't happened yet?
Yep,
Did
I was a student when I
you were
had
a
my first
student?
loss, and I
Yeah.
was like a very advanced student at that point, probably like 2 years into my
Right.
3 year training.
Right. And so
Yep.
I'm curious how like this experience shaped you as a midwife, and like when did elemental birth rights come into play, and was there a time where this wasn't part of your midwifery practice, or has it always been? If it hasn't always been, how have you seen, you know, your practice change through the years, and even like the families that you serve and their experiences?
So when I was a student, I had that experience, and that definitely informed me about sort of like what was important to me in midwifery care. And then, of course, you have to like go through all the motions, as you know, to become a midwife. You have to get all your numbers, you have to do certain experiences, you have to work with a lot of different practitioners that may or may not have the same practice style. I had a very defining turning point moment in early practice. I was just graduating. I was getting my last continuity of care with a midwife out in Colorado. I worked in rural Colorado, serving like this very huge area. And there was a client that I considered like, you know, she was like an acquaintance before she was a client. Like I knew her out of the client relationship, and then she began working in our practice, and I like really was like, I love this woman. I just cared about her so much. I was really in, I was so committed. And we went through her pregnancy, and like throughout the pregnancy I definitely felt like there was more that she needed. And I didn't know what that was at that time. I didn't have anything to call it. So we got to her labor and birth, and I was probably like, I don't know, maybe like 3 or 4 births into becoming a midwife. So I was like super, super fresh. And we were at her labor for many, many days. And it was like there was just like a failure to progress kind of energy. It just wasn't moving forward. But I kept pushing it because I really wanted her to have this home birth that she wanted. And I was, naive about, I didn't have the experience to know like we should probably just go in. So we had this experience and we transported in and we were in the hospital. And I said something to her like, there's something that you're resisting. I don't know what it is, but I feel like it would be like really powerful for you like to name it or just like what is going on for you. And for her in that moment, it was a complete shaman's blow. And she did not appreciate that question. And I totally heard her. I mean, she didn't say that in the moment, but we like pretty much never spoke after the birth. She blamed me for her C-section and her baby ended up needing like, I think some really deep NICU care for like how long we stayed at home. And she blamed me and had like this story that I like, kind of did something in that moment that was just really unfair. And what I heard from that was like, you're right. That was not the right time to be introducing this to you. I should have been doing this work, whatever this work might be, like in the beginning of the pregnancy, throughout the pregnancy, like asking that of you. And that was so unfair, like really was unfair. And so it was a huge learning moment for me because, of course, it had that like even deeper care that, oh my God, this was a person that like I considered a friend. And now she doesn't even want to talk to me. So there was so much to unpack there. And what I will say about that is that I also feel like within my work, there's a huge connection to midwives and the mother wound. And I'll say that right there and maybe we can come back and revisit it. But what I saw in that moment was that some of the stuff that she has with her own mother was being projected onto me of like frustration and anger, of like me letting her down in that way. And it just really motivated me to figure out what I could possibly do with people to help them prepare in the way that I saw was fit, that was not being addressed, and to give them full potentiality of time and investment and energy to like unpack the stuff that I was trying to get her to look at in that moment that was just completely impossible to ask of somebody when they're at that point in labor and have already been pushed so far. So that was really, really early in my career. And I feel like I came to midwifery from the avenue of like spirit really pushed me into this work. It wasn't something that I was like, oh, what will I do? I'll do this. It was very much like, you're gonna do this. And so it felt like the medicine of that particular experience was a long medicine and it played out in my system. And that was probably a couple years before. So that was a couple years after the miscarriage, but a couple years before the second miscarriage, which I think solidified sort of something because it wasn't till after 5 years later that I had the second miscarriage. I got really motivated. And in 2020, between 2018 and 2020, started writing this coursework based on my own healing because I was doing a bunch of healing in my life with the patterns that I'm sharing with you, with the mother wound work. And I was like, oh, this is exactly what I need to be sharing with my clients. And I can put it up in this format and make this medicine meal and this coursework. And I can see the exact path forward, which I give credit to these ancestor babies for sort of showing me the map to give it to them in a way that they can digest to work through during pregnancy. And what I saw, at least in my own practice, is that missing piece that I couldn't name or articulate was not there any longer. And I was able to go to a place with people and prepare them during pregnancy. And no matter what their birth outcome be, that they felt that it was their story and it wasn't something that I was interjecting or pushing, and that they had all the tools they needed to be able to address whatever comes up in that labor and birth moment that can be so big with a lot of awareness.
I love that. Since you brought it up a couple times, will you speak about the mother wound?
Yeah,
For
definitely.
people who are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. So the mother wound is, it's kind of a gift that our mothers give us. It's not something I maybe would have said when I started this journey, but I was just thinking about it and really, the betrayal that might happen with our mother or the abandonment or whatever the wound is that we have with our mother is kind of like the original wound, the seed wound that I feel like beckons us to awaken to what it is that we need to take care of ourselves. And so I'm just going to say that right out front. It's also the most painful and challenging thing that we come to work out on this planet. I mean, we are all from a mother. We all have that ability, as womb keepers to become a mother, potentially, if we have the fertility. And I feel like we were all created. We've all been created. It's a really spiritually, it's at the forefront and the center of everything that I do because I'm a birth worker. And I feel like midwives are the archetypal mother of mothers. We mother mothers into motherhood. So it's just such an important aspect and energy that has come alive within my practice. And the mother wound, like on the ground running, is any of the issues that you have with your mother, whatever it is you feel like you didn't get that you needed when you were little, that you then have to learn to give to yourself. That's what the mother wound is. And I say that it's a gift because I just don't know if life would function in the same way if we were necessarily given everything that we wanted from somebody else, if we would ever learn to source it from ourselves. So it's just a very powerful and beautiful unfolding. I'll say that.
Interesting. I would be curious to like dig into mine.
If you move through the elemental wheel,
Yeah.
you went back to the like the nonverbal, there might be like a somatic feeling.
Because I did some somatic work, like where you go into the womb and it was just like bright and yellow and happy. I was like, okay.
What I would say to that too is like, maybe there's not. And that's okay. Like maybe it's with your dad.
Yeah, right.
And maybe it's
or
with your
like
dad.
that you sometimes are mothered by people who aren't your mother.
Exactly. And we all have experiences when we're little where we're like traumatized to some degree.
What are the biggest takeaways that you hope for families listening? I'm pregnant. I don't even want to think about loss or, any of that.
So do we want to talk about loss or do we want to talk about like the stuff I'm talking about in pregnancy? Because there's a couple things like floating around here.
We could do both because we have touched on both.
Yeah, I would love to talk about loss a little bit just because one of the most important things I feel like is addressing loss in pregnancy. Because I feel like it's really a disservice from the midwifery perspective not to include just like a disclosure that nothing is guaranteed. And just because they're establishing care with a provider doesn't mean that we can somehow guarantee that they're going to have a healthy living pregnancy or birth. You know what I mean? And it's just there's such a high percentage of miscarriage and it's so unspoken about that I feel like it truly is our work to normalize it so that women know that A, they can talk to us about it. B, we're the kind of people that they should talk to us, talk about this with, and that we can support them because we have experience supporting other people. And also because the babies that come that don't need to live out their full life have a lot of medicine that it would be very helpful to be keyed into. They're doing their work of living very quickly. And so that initiation in itself is one that deserves a lot of attention and support, I feel like. So I would just say that to people who are pregnant, it's like nothing's guaranteed. And just give thanks that you're being graced with this spirit and try to make the most out of the time that you have with them, whether it be you get to parent them throughout their whole entire continuum or you're just with them for several weeks. Yeah. And I'll say also that with loss, death and birth are one and the same. It's the same threshold. It's a crossing through and it's beautiful either way, although our culture doesn't create a lot of space for recognizing the beauty of death. And
we
so
see loss as a failure.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
an accident. Yeah.
And so hyper focusing on having a living baby at the end, like just like how that like miscarriage isn't talked about. It's not like something people realize like 1/3 of pregnancies end in miscarriages is like a statistic I've heard. And like, that's a lot of pregnancies if we think about that. And like, how many people really know that have wombs?
Exactly. I love that. Yeah. I feel like it's really important information for people because my experience of having a loss was, what did I do wrong? Like that failure idea, but like even deeper of like, I did that. That's my fault. And so then like internalizing that and working through that grief, it's like, you don't need that on top of grief. That's a lot of compounding of like, oh, I did that and I'm sad. But I will say that those ancestors that come and they live in the other dimension and we don't get to raise them through their humanity on this earth plane, they're still ancestors and they still deserve a place on our altar and they still are a part of our family. They belong to our family system. And so my training in family constellation work is giving them a place in the system, as well as honoring fate as larger than ourselves. We need to be humble before fate, and fate is bigger than we are. And so I think within our culture and like sort of like the medicalization of birth is like, well, we're in control of this and we're going to go to the hospital and then everything's going to be fine. It's like, well, there's no risk-free birth. there's no risk-free pregnancy. And so when you open yourself up to the great mystery in that way of getting pregnant and receiving that spirit, you're also opening yourself up to the possibility that there may be a loss at some point. And I just think it's really grounding and balancing to introduce that earlier on so that people can walk through in an informed way of like, okay, like this could go either way. There is no guarantee. That's just the truth of it. We are working with the mystery in that way.
Yeah. We've talked a lot to like the families listening, and another portion of our listeners are birth workers. You know, you worked with Carissa, so obviously you work with birth workers. How is that different in the work you do with families? Because it's not their loss, but they experienced a loss.
Well, for 2 years, I actually trained practitioners in my modality because I felt that the modality that I created was important enough for birth workers to go through to be able to actually template their clients with the same information. Like, I don't believe in like a hierarchical teaching method. So the way that I dealt with that was by training other birth workers to do the work that I was doing so that they could walk beside families and sort of radiate out that same wisdom by doing that work within their own family and unpacking all of that stuff so that when they say to their client, well, have you ever thought about the mother wound and how it impacts you? They're not saying you should go study the mother wound. They're saying like, this is how it shows up for me. You know, how does it show up for you? So on the topic of loss, how do I work with birth workers is that I include all of, you know, it's really the same information. It's not any different what I would say to a client or what I would say to a birth worker. Although I would say with the birth worker is that we're walking like as sacred threshold keepers. So we really need to be willing to hold the space for both. And I feel like that's something that I hold within my particular essence is like making space and becoming comfortable with holding grief, holding death, understanding that we're not God and that there's no way that we can guarantee anything for any of the people that we're serving. And so doing the work to like unpack that and like be willing to stand at the threshold and be like holding both sides. You know, when we sit at women's feet and we're waiting for a baby, we don't get to know how that's going to play out. So how can we become grounded and resourced within that space and sort of like let go of the witch wounds that have been held against our particular profession to be able to normalize and see that like not everything is based on our ability and skill level. Like some things are beyond us.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Can you speak a little bit more to the courses that you do offer?
Yeah. So I offer the pregnancy course, which is the one that I was talking about in the beginning. It's had a couple of names by now, but it was like I've been calling it just like the Elemental Birth Rites medicine wheel at this point, because that's the same medicine wheel that I would walk birth keepers through if I was doing that training again. I went through 2 cohorts with that, and that was really wonderful. And we may offer it again. It's just like more of a focus thing because it takes more energy. So those are the 2 courses. And then that practitioner, that medicine wheel is able to be gone through by couples on a self-guided journey. So it's just like you purchase the course and you do it on your own time and you don't necessarily interface with anybody, or you can go through it with a practitioner, which are the people that I've trained. And so like if I was guiding someone through that work, the difference would be that they would be meeting with me like however many times they need during that time to also receive flower essence as a support for the emotional, spiritual aspects of some of like the psychological changes and transformations that happen when you're doing ancestral healing and shadow work. So those are like the main things. And then I also have just like a free offering. It's a miscarriage mini course, which I think I shared with Carissa. It's just a super simple 5-step kind of ritual for folks that are going through loss to make a ceremony out of it so that it gains meaning for them and can be like integrated in a good way.
I'd love to link that in the show notes.
Yeah, I would love to share that. And then we also have a postpartum mini course that kind of pairs in with the pregnancy course. And it's just like a mini reflection of all of the information that's digested through the pregnancy course in like a much more like digestible postpartum way, because you might not have time to sit down and journal and do a bunch. It's more like doing these small rituals with your baby or your partner after your birth to help you integrate your birth.
And I feel like were you going to say something, Carissa?
Well, I was just going to say, you threw out flower essences. Can you just real quickly, because I don't think everyone knows what a flower essence is, because you were naming that you also offer flower essence support for some people walking through the program.
We just used it for the first time with my daughter, and it was amazing.
They're such good medicines. Oh my God, my life changed when the flower essences came in. Yeah, I became a practitioner with the flower essences about 3 years ago, and it really changed the course of my work because I was trying to be the flower essence for all these years. And it's just like, I need to get out of the way because I am getting in the way. And now I have these amazing plant allies that I am sharing with people. And flower essences are vibrational medicine. So there's no actual plant material in the actual formula that you take. And much like homeopathic, is extremely dilute medicine. And the more dilute it is, the more powerful it is, especially working on the subtle realms like the energetic and emotional. And so I make flower essences generally for people, like if I'm doing a session with them, I'll make them a custom formula based on what's going on with them. And it really works on a frequency level to help them like work through these little pieces that they're maybe stuck on or they can't quite like get over with that I was beating my head against before I had them. So the way that you make a flower essence is literally solarizing a plant or a flower in water. And so it's really about the energy and the medicine of water, which is the first medicine, like for all peoples. Like if someone's sick, they should probably drink some water before we do many other things. And this water is just infused with the spirit of a plant. So once the sun hits the water and the flower together, there's a synergy that happens where the imprinting, the energetic imprinting goes onto the molecules of water. So the more dilute it is, the more molecules of water have this imprint on them. And so then there's just a little bit of like a brandy or some type of alcohol to preserve that essence. And they're so incredible the way that they work. I cannot scream it from the roofs how amazingly incredible this medicine is, how affordable it is, and how like accessible it is. Like anybody at their home can make a flower essence to support them through a certain thing. So I just love that particular work. And it goes so well with the shadow work and ancestral healing because it really helps to uproot and work on those subtle levels where a lot of times people can't even see because it's in the shadow. And just go in and do these repairs and help people like lift their vibrations so that they can move on to different challenges that are like in the next rung of frequency.
Yeah, the most popular one that people might have heard of is Rescue Remedy.
Yes.
If you've heard of that, that is a flower essence.
Yeah, and it's like a staple, like the Bach flower remedies really normalize that medicine, which I give thanks to him for that. And there's so much deeper to go because there's also like gem essences and mushroom essences and really just taking the energetic imprints of nature and using them as a resource, which I know anybody who goes for a walk outside and looks at plants is going to feel better. So if you just put them in your body, then your body just gets to be like with all the plants in the garden.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the things we talked about are like preparation, how to prepare yourself. Is the way you coach any different for someone who didn't do any of that and is now sitting in something heavy, whether it is a birth worker or a family who's experienced loss and knows nothing of what you're speaking of? Do you work with families after the fact? And is the teaching any different? Or is it like, no, this same teaching helps you whether you're preparing or have experienced something?
I mean, that's a great question. It's very like methodology. I don't know if I've ever thought about it from that angle before. I would say like the essence of what the medicine is that I offer is probably very similar in all avenues, but I might not talk about it or come from the same way. Like I would never tell a family who's grieving to go to my course. Like there would be no point in that. I would probably meet them where they were at. And then, it's like it's so individualized when I work with people, like based on what they're going through. Like when Carissa came to me with the loss that she was processing, it was about the moment with her, like I wasn't trying to reference things back from like, but I do feel that ancestral healing, shadow work, all of our limiting beliefs is all going to play into how we're feeling in any given moment and whether or not we have a chance to like go and like uproot things from the past in that way or not. There's probably some element of that will come to be if we were to continue working together. But I would say that mostly what people need when they're going through loss is they need presence and they need ceremony. And that's like the essence of the medicine that I offer is just like that presence, support, kindness, understanding, listening. I mean, the things that any small child would need if they hurt themselves. And then, of course, like working with the flowers, like everybody needs to be given flowers when someone's died. So like we all need to receive like the flower medicine, whether it be just like through a bouquet or an essence or a formula. But I would say that for people who maybe went through a birth that was really challenging and didn't have the tools that I'm offering, like I love to help people integrate too. Like, how can we take everything that fell onto you almost seemingly from nowhere? Not so, but if you didn't receive the preparation, how can we help make sense of this so that story serves you in your parenting? so that it empowers you to feel like, wow, I did the best with what I had in that moment. And there's so much for me to unpack to continue to receive the medicine from my experience, even though it was really challenging for me.
Can you speak to how you stay grounded through all this work? Because I can imagine it can be like a lot to help a lot of people process through things. How do you like take care of yourself?
Yeah, well, I am a Taurus, so that helps. I'm very earthy, and I probably came to this life, chose the parents that I did, and had like a fairly untumultuous childhood so that I would be very grounded to be able to offer the work that I offer. So the question's a little bit like hard for me. I mean, self-care for me is like my meditation in the morning. I've been learning that I really need like space, like to take space from people, especially if I'm doing a lot of work. I have my red belt on today. That's something that I've gleaned from my spiritual work, is like protecting myself energetically, especially when I'm doing my work. So burning herbs, copal, sage at my home. And really like what I'm really working on and my work in this world is letting go. Like I have to learn to let go because I am so earthy and I am so grounded on this plane. Sometimes I have trouble of like letting go of other people's energy. So that's like my spiritual work, is to learn how to like be like water and be able to absorb and see in the way that I do and help people through these really like nuanced and subtle emotions and feelings. And then also like it's not mine. Like I don't actually have to process it through my body. And that's like, that's actually like my personal spiritual work. Like I have to, like I'm still figuring that out. So I don't necessarily have like an answer for everybody, but I think for each person, finding out what their self-care looks like and being very committed to it is a must if you're going to be doing any, even midwifery. It's like just figuring out what you need to do to get home from that birth and let it go.
Elemental birth rites. What does rites mean to you?
So rites, spelt like RITES, is rites of passage. And it's like having different rituals and or practices that connect us to like the impermanence, the ceremony of life. And when I say rites, I'm talking about initiation, because really every single thing that we go through in our life, whether we're aware of it or not, that challenges us on a really deep level to grow is a rites of passage. And so birth for me, like when I look at the scope of life, it's like birth is one of the most major rites of passage. So if you are somebody who is going to be giving birth, you too are walking through a very big rites of passage. And that's what elemental birth rites is pointing to, is like working with the elements to claim your birth as a rites of passage.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
If there's one thing that you could just like have like be a takeaway from this message for people, what would it be?
I think find out what your self-care needs to be and do it. And like, don't compromise it, because it's the most important thing. And that is the voice of your inner child, is that manual for what it is to take care of yourself. And I think as parents, it's even more important because you're templating that to your child, who you are meant to care for, but they're learning more about how to be by how you are. So if you can figure out what it is that like grounds you and clears your energy and helps you feel resourced, do that thing and do it for them too, because they're going to learn that from you and how you speak to yourself and how you treat yourself moment to moment. And I just think for parents, like having as many resources as possible is, it's what I pray for on this world, because really the family is the most important energy on our planet, and the future generations, and creating a better and more healed world for them starts with each of us doing that within ourselves so that we can impart that.
Beautiful. Well, if families want to reach out to you, can you please plug yourself and leave all your contact info?
Yeah. Do you want me to do that verbally?
Sure. Yeah. And we'll leave it in the
Okay.
show notes too.
Great. So we have a website at www.elementalbirthrites.com, rights spelled RITES. And we are also on Instagram at Elemental Birth Rites. And we also have a podcast called Reclaiming the Sacred Feminine Arts with Elemental Birth Rites, which is available on Spotify. And if you want to reach out to me personally to get a session, it's Rachael Jean at elementalbirthrites.com.
Great. Thank you so much for being on and sharing everything with us.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
Carissa.
Krista, for connecting us.
So fun.
So fun.
Yay. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe. If you'd like to follow along, you can find us on Instagram at Born Wild Podcast and Facebook. You can go to our website at www.bornwildmidwifery.com. See you later.